Let's jump into our topic, trauma in the posterior segment. So before getting into specifics, let's have an overview of the entire topic. There are innumerable ways in which the posterior segment of an eye can get injured. Listed here are a few common modes. Toys and household items are culprits in pediatric injuries. Young men present with workplace injury, rarely one can encounter insect bites and ophthalma nodosa as well. The Birmingham Eye Trauma System gave us an overview of how eye injuries can be classified. Basically, it can either be a closed globe injury or an open globe injury. Closed globe injuries can be contusions or lamellar lacerations. When you have a deforming force that acts from inside out to create a full thickness wound, it's called a globe rupture. When the same deforming force acts from outside in, it's called a penetrating wound. So a penetrating wound can be associated with an intraocular foreign body. Rarely, you can have a perforating wound as well. Now, these injuries can lead to a spectrum of changes in the posterior segment of the eye. First, we can look at these effects from the standpoint of time, immediate effects or those that occur a short while later. All anatomical structures can take a hit, so to speak. Later on, secondary effects supersede. Next, we can look at them as either mechanical, infective, or inflammatory events. All immediate events are mechanical. Infective and inflammatory events manifest a short while later. Some manifestations are not so common. For example, we had reported this case of retained intraocular foreign body with frosted branch angiitis. The vascular sheathing component disappeared after the IOFB was removed under steroid cover. So that was a general overview of the topic. We move on to clinical exam of an eye with ocular trauma. Prognosis depends on many factors, so it is paramount to make a detailed note of certain parameters at the first point of contact. Vision at presentation, endophthalmitis, RD, RAPD, foreign body, if any, size, location, and extent of the wound, they all assume importance. It can be seen that OTS encompasses all of these parameters, and one can prognosticate to a certain extent based on these alone. When it comes to zones of injury, the globe is arbitrarily divided into three areas: anterior to the limbus, 5 mm behind the limbus, and the area beyond. In routine clinical practice, we may look at these as corneal, limbal and scleral, or occult dehiscences. Examining the wound gives us some idea of whether the force was inside out or outside in. A gamut of investigations are available to the ophthalmologist. Based on individual need, the clinician can choose what is most appropriate. Ocular ultrasound is among the most important investigations. It needs to be gently performed in an eye with trauma and is best performed until after repair if the wound is really large. So these are classic findings, and all of us are aware of how they appear on B-scan. Free-flowing movements of a posterior vitreous detachment, high reflective wriggly movements of a retinal detachment, and dome-shaped immobile echoes in case of choroidal detachment. In ocular trauma, though, careful examination can reveal many other findings. For example, on the left, vitreous incarceration can be seen at the site of scleral repair with plenty of dot echoes suggesting endophthalmitis. On the right, a cursory observation shows all three membrane echoes that we saw previously. But a keen examiner can make out a bloodline PVD, a retinal detachment, and a serous choroidal detachment in these frames itself. However, occasionally the globe may be disorganized, making anatomical distinction very less clear. Always look for an intraocular foreign body as well. SD-OCT provides valuable information as far as prognosis is concerned. Integrity of the outer hyperreflective bands gives us some clue of the extent of injury and how it may behave with time. Apart from its utility in the orbit, a CT scan can also help the retinal surgeon. Commonly encountered conditions are a ruptured globe, single or multiple foreign bodies, and dislocated lenses. In eyes with really severe trauma, electrophysiologic tests, especially VEP, find some use to assess the visual potential. Later on, conditions such as optic neuropathy, traumatic optic neuropathy, can also be diagnosed. Next, what are the special situations that ocular trauma presents? A few require surgery, and a few conditions need a conservative approach. First, the latter. Conditions like commotio retinae and choroidal tears need only be observed. Indeed, some hemorrhages and even macular holes are best observed. Systemic and ocular trauma can cause vaso-occlusion and microinfarcts. Now, these will manifest as spots of ischemia and hemorrhages, as seen in Purshas and Valsalva retinopathy. The patients shown here in these examples were simply observed and visual recovery was appreciable. Presented with macular hole after workplace injury, one can see that the hole is rather small. He was observed, and in 3 weeks, the hole had closed by itself. So, in young people with formed vitreous, there is no harm in waiting for some time before surgery. Other rare manifestations. We had reported this unusual horseshoe tear at the macula in JAMA. This boy was hit by a cricket ball. The other patient on the right had a secondary CNVM long after the trauma had occurred. Preretinal hemorrhages can be encountered in many instances, including this one of Terson syndrome. Vision was compromised as blood was bang in front of the fovea. The simple YAG hyaloidotomy was sufficient to produce gratifying results. Sometimes the result of treatment are not so great. In this particular instance, we had subretinal hemorrhages associated with Brooks membrane tear. So scarring occurs under the fovea and it may not be reversible. Here we tried pneumatic displacement. One can rarely attempt surgery as well. So those were conditions that mostly require limited intervention. Now moving on to those that actually need ocular surgery. One can look at them under the following broad heads. Open globe injury repair is of course the primary surgery. Next, mechanical effects like dialysis, detachments and dislocations. Then you have foreign body removal, and finally management of endophthalmitis. There are two ways in which one can approach a posterior segment surgery for RD or retained intraocular foreign body. Either early, along with the primary repair, or in a delayed manner as a second surgery. Of course, if there is just vitreous hemorrhage or an IOL dislocation, one can wait longer. When going in early, we encounter edematous and inflamed tissue, which makes manipulation really difficult. On the other hand, going in too late can lead to formation and contraction of membranes, and that would compromise the results of your surgery. So it's a good idea to reduce inflammation medically and then intervene between 1 and 2 weeks. Of course, all of this is when there is no endophthalmitis. So in any case of open injury, the question should be answered every time we review the patient is the risk low or high, or is infection already established? Next, coming to surgery itself. Once we have decided that surgery is needed, what are the points to be considered when you plan for surgery? Eye surgery is, never more challenging and demanding than in posterior segment trauma. But one needs to have a full array of equipment readily available to be employed. Theater staff need to be thinking on their feet, and they should be able to read the situation and adapt accordingly. In this video here, one type of foreign body forceps was not apt, so I had to switch to another one with narrower blades, and all this has to happen immediately with minimum delay. First things first, make sure that the general condition of the patient is stable. One can consider GA also in case of large open wounds. If primary repair was done elsewhere, do not hesitate in trying to communicate and finding out the extent of the injury from the other surgeon. So when we actually start, the eye can be soft, and placing trocars itself is a real challenge. Again, axial opacities make posterior viewing really difficult, so be prepared for that. Often you might have to take the help of your cornea and cataract colleagues. You're really lucky if you have someone like Manas sir in your team. As a VR surgeon, standard ports, both location and number of ports may have to be changed. This helps with choroidal drainage, foreign body retrieval, and avoiding recently repaired areas. It may be preferable to use longer infusion cannulas, as you need to get beyond the detached choroid and retina. You don't want to be subretinal or suprachoroidal. In certain cases, I personally prefer having a superior sclerocorneal tunnel made at the outset. It can help to remove intraocular lenses or foreign bodies a little more easily. As I was mentioning, anatomic structures anteriorly have to be managed first. So corneal grafts or temporary keratoprosthesis may be needed. You need to have your phaco fragmentome ready. Lens extraction can also be employed. The IOL could need repositioning, fixation, replacement, or it simply has to be removed. So managing the lens. On the easy side, this is a very soft subluxated cataract that just vaporized in a matter of seconds once I employed the cutter. SFIOL was placed after that. On the more difficult side, in this particular eye with an active ciliary bleed, you see that the view is really hazy. And over and above that, a hard dislocated cataract was seen. So here I had to use the fragmentome. It takes time and one has to be really careful. Remove all the vitreous beforehand and stay away from the retina if you're using a fragmentome. Finally, in this eye with zonular loss and a hard cataract, plain old lens extraction is being used. And these days, I prefer levitating a dislocated nucleus from the posterior segment into the anterior segment and removing it by this method. Now, dealing with the IOL. A vitreoretinal surgeon is always happy if the IOL in question is a three-piece IOL. Here, I'm simply clearing the vitreous from the haptic. I exteriorize both haptics by grasping with an intraocular forceps. And this three-piece IOL, which was subluxated, is simply converted into an SF IOL very easily. Here, there is a CTR along with the three-piece lens. So intraocularly, I carefully disengage both of them using a PFCL as a protective layer over the macula. CTR is removed, and the same IOL is picked up by the tip of the haptics and refixed as an SF IOL using the Gabors technique. So as I said, a three-piece IOL is always good as far as a VR surgeon is concerned. But if there is a single piece lens, unlike in the previous case, I remove the complex as a whole and use another three-piece lens as an SF IOL. Of course, there are techniques where surgeons use Gore-Tex or Prolene sutures to refix single-piece lenses as SFIOLs, but my personal preference is that I would simply remove them and use a three-piece as an SFIOL. So moving on to the actual posterior segment, the goals of surgery here are you need to clear the media, remove the vitreous scaffold and the posterior hyaloid, and if there is a foreign body, you need to remove that as well. Treat all breaks and associated detachments. Often we are unable to see the infusion tip before starting surgery, and this is very important. As I said, you don't want to remain suprachoroidal. I use a simple technique of tapping the infusion cannula and introducing air into it. I then connect it and check for air bubbles entering in the eye. This gives me some evidence of the tip being inside the vitreous cavity and not behind the retina or choroid. One usually starts with choroidal drainage. Vitreous hemorrhage may be dense and completely obscuring your view. It's good to proceed rather slowly and in the nasal quadrants until the retina is actually seen. Once vitreous hemorrhage is clear, thoroughly check for breaks and dialysis. Missed foreign bodies can also be present. Look for a macular hole. Of course, retinal detachment is the elephant in the room. Retinal tears, dialysis, giant retinal tears with or without RD. These are among the more common manifestations and are tackled in the routine manner with an encerclage preferably. So here I'm performing an internal procedure with oil tamponade. So endolaser is being done. The belt buckle is tightened, and immediately you can see that, you can see the buckle indent there. Brake is on the buckle. Things are good, and oil is injected. So when managing an RD, it should be remembered that RD is the more dramatic and striking manifestation. However, there can be other pathology that requires your attention. The other option is a scleral buckle, which is sadly being forgotten these days. Sure, there is an inferior RD, that's the brake. I am performing SRF drainage with a 26 gauge needle. Now cryo is being done, and on the brake, anchor sutures are placed. And for this particular case, I used a 276 band. There you can see the brake is flat on the buckle, and it's as simple as that. So scleral buckling definitely has utility, especially in young people with formed vitreous and in eyes with dialysis. These are some of the other sequelae of trauma that a VR surgeon may be called upon to manage. Manasa was speaking about iododialysis. So here I'm using the same railroad technique to repair dialysis, and inside there is an RD corresponding to the quadrant of dialysis that's managed in the routine manner. On the right side, this particular young child had a nasal RD with a large retinal fold involving the macula. You can see that it's going down to the site of wound repair. No matter what I did, I simply could not, flatten out the fold. So at some point you say, this is it, and exit with grace. There is also this example of a deep wound with a rod that went through and through the retina and choroid, and it actually exposed the sclera on the posterior pole. Luckily, you see here the macula was spared. This was a 6-year-old kid. And it was it was by providence that his macula was spared and he's having good vision now. So as we see, myriad manifestations are possible with ocular trauma. Moving on to intraocular foreign bodies, they can be of any material, and a rough guide is given here. In general, metallic and magnetic foreign bodies dominate, and as a surgeon, you find it easier if the foreign body is magnetic. Now, why is that? could use magnetic devices to remove the foreign body rather than fiddling with bulky forceps close to the retina. Of historical importance, this is a giant foreign body magnet that was used at my alma mater, RIO Chennai. Today, the internal approach is of course preferred. The foreign body could be at any level in the vitreous, on the retina, or subretinal. In this particular instance, the foreign body is subretinal, and I make sure I barrage the entire area before attempting any sort of nudging. I prefer using PFCL when an IOP is present in the eye, and that helps a lot. For one, it prevents the sharp IOP from falling on the retina or macula and injuring it, as it can be seen in these two instances. PFCL breaks the fall of the foreign body, and some kind of flotation may also be offered, and it helps you to pick up the foreign body easily. We have been using the posterior vitrectorexis and limbal delivery of the foreign body, as that is comparatively easy when compared to removal through a sclerotomy with bulky forceps. We have also reported this in RCBR. Of course, lens status after trauma is very important when you're employing this technique. This is how a magnet handshake technique is used in both these instances. Lens was damaged and had to be removed. I have used two magnets to gently remove the intraocular foreign body. We find that the large sclerocorneal tunnel used here is more accommodating of the bulky three-dimensional foreign body and is self-sealing as well. Now the dreaded E word. Many organisms are implicated in endophthalmitis. In culture-positive cases, gram-positive cocci, that is coagulase negative staph like Epidermis or Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, and even gram-negative bacilli like Pseudomonas are important. Culture-negative endoph is also common. Foreign bodies have to be carefully looked for in case of endoph, and going into the history, asking for mode of injury, and carefully reconstructing the events that happened, provide useful clues to know if there is if you can expect a foreign body in that particular eye. This is a relatively gentle case on the left, if I may call it that. There was minimal vitreous haze. It's important to proceed very slowly. There were definite exudates on the retina, as you can see there on the video on the left. They were removed with a flute needle. The other case on the right has more dense vitreous exudates and pre-retinal exudation. As you can see there, the exudates are pretty dense, white or yellow rather. You proceed really carefully and try to find the plane beneath the vitreous. There you go. The surgeon has found a plane under the posterior vitreous. So always remain away from the retina. After removal, we see that the vessels are dilated and tortuous. The retina on the whole is unhealthy. You might also encounter sheathing and hemorrhages in some of these eyes. In some practices, surgeons are comfortable using silicone oil after vitrectomy for endophthalmitis. Appropriate intravitreal antibiotics need to be injected, and close follow-up is essential to look for other complications. So in the last 15 minutes, I've tried to cover what is possible in this vast domain of ocular trauma to the posterior segment. I hope I've been able to give some insight into the mind of a VR surgeon who's preparing to handle a case of ocular trauma. As the last few words, it's important to remember that meticulous wound closure and attention to detail is very, very important. One may need a staged approach. A clear plan is absolutely essential. However, we need to anticipate surprises and be prepared to switch tracks if the situation so demands. It should always be remembered that in most cases, appreciable visual recovery is definitely possible. Thank you all for patient audience. Thank you.